Hey everybody, welcome back to another Phyrexia All Will Be One set review. Today we're going to take a look at all of the blue cards in the set. Just a quick reminder, this is a draft review. We're only talking about draft, no other formats. As well, I've not played with these cards. These are just sort of how I'll be approaching these cards for my first few drafts. Ratings may change over time. One last quick reminder, I don't use the ABC grade scale anymore. I use a pick order scale. I'm talking about where I'd be happy picking these cards generally in pack 1. Keep in mind that things like a pick 8 pick is not a bad pick. It just means that it's probably filler in your deck. A lot of those cards that are pretty handy in your deck, you don't tend to spend a first pick on them. You pick them a little bit later. But let's get started with Aspirant's Ascent. Aspirant's Ascent is a single blue mana for an instant at common until the end of turn. Target creature gets +1/+3 and gains Flying and Toxic 1. Cute little combat trick with a nice bit of reach from the flying. It's not a combat trick that I'm going to be looking out for, a lot. Like most combat tricks, if I happen to have a space for it, I'm not going to feel bad playing this, but I'm not going to actively make space for it. This is kind of a great example of a card that I'd be very happy to pick up on the wheel. That basically means pick 9 through 15. So you don't spend a real pick on this, and you don't try to play it, but you don't have to feel bad if you do. Up next is Atmosphere Surgeon. Atmosphere Surgeon is 1 and a blue for a creature Phyrexian wizard at uncommon. It's a 2/1. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it. Remove an oil counter from Atmosphere Surgeon. Target creature gains flying until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. This is kind of a cool, repeatable version of Aspirant's Ascent. In fact, Aspirant's Ascent would actually give you an oil counter on this that you could take off and give something else flying as well. This, I think, is going to be very cool in the blue-red Spells Matter deck. You can just build up a few oil counters on this and then have a real big flying turn. I'm going to pick this pretty highly to get myself into that blue-red oil counters matter, spells matter deck. It's always my favorite to do blue-red. This will be no different. So I'll pick this pretty highly, kind of in the second, third range, maybe on the end of the second, third range. Certainly not spending a real pick on this, a first pick if I can help it. But I think this is going to be a big role player in that deck. Up next is Blade of Shared Souls. Blade of Shared Souls is 2 and a blue for an artifact equipment at rare. It has 4 Mirrodin, so it makes a 2/2 rebel and throws this sword onto it. Whenever Blade of Shared Souls becomes attached to a creature, for as long as Blade of Shared Souls remains attached to it, you may have that creature become a copy of another target creature you control. Womp womp. Equip 2. Clones that only hit your own board are typically not as good because you need to already have something good that you want to copy. It's way better when you can copy your opponent's thing that's causing you trouble and now you're, at parity, hopefully. So this definitely isn't as amazing as a two-sided clone could be. I do like the fact that you can upgrade the clone a bit later, though. Maybe you don't have your crazy bomb yet, and this can be your 3/3 or your 4/4 or whatever. And then later you can throw the sword on something else and turn that thing into a copy of your big bomb. Keep in mind this is not reconfigure, so you don't get to pull this off the rebel and put it back on. You do need to have something else to switch it over. This is still probably a first-ish pick. I think I'd actually rather put it in the second, third sort of frame of mind. If there's a really good uncommon or great removal, I'm certainly picking it over this due to the fact that it is a one-sided clone. But it's still pretty good. So let's go second, third on Blade of Shared Souls. Up next is Blue Sun's Twilight. Blue Sun's Twilight is X blue for a sorcery at rare. Gain control of target creature with mana value X or less. If X is 5 or more, create a token that's a copy of that creature. This is incredible. It's a straight up bomb. You get to grab whatever you need to grab. If it's 4 mana, you get to just pay 6 for this. If it's 5 mana, you get to grab it for a lot of mana. 7 mana is definitely not a little bit, but you do get to grab kind of whatever you want. And if that X is 5 or more, you do get to copy the creature. Keep in mind, if you need to, if you want to, you can put more mana into this to make a copy of that 4-drop or 3-drop or 2-drop that you're copying. But of course, you probably would be preferring to copy something real big, which means you're going to want to put a lot of mana into this. This is great. This is an easy first pick. I will never, ever pass this card in a pack that I'm offered it in pick 1. Up next is Bring the Ending, which I think would be a really cool name for the end of the Planeswalker Spark, if that is what happens. That is my prediction, by the way. Just because it would be a really cool contrast to the Mending. You have the Mending, you have the Ending. But we'll see if that happens. Bring the Ending is 1 and a blue for an instant at common. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. Corrupted, just straight up counter the spell. So this is bad if it's not corrupted. We've seen this before. I think it was Quench? Is that right? It had a Q in it. And when you have to pay 2, it's just not good. There's such a narrow window that you can actually counter something. But if you're in a corrupted deck, if you are very confident that you are going to turn on corrupted, and this is just 1 and a blue for a straight up counter spell, that's actually really good. So you need to know if you're going to be able to have this cost 2 mana to be a counter spell or 2 mana to be a quench. You should pick it up pretty late. You should be one of the only people who want to play this anyways, so I bet you can grab this on the wheel. Up next is Chrome Prowler. Chrome Prowler is 2 and a blue for an artifact creature Phyrexian cat at common. It's a 3/2 with flash. When Chrome Prowler enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls. So it's not uncommon that we get a 3 mana 3/2 flash cat, and here's our 3 mana 3/2 flash cat, but this one also taps something down. Note that it doesn't freeze it, or I guess these days it would give a stun counter, wouldn't it? But it'll still prevent your opponent from attacking you with something for a turn. It will potentially open the door for you on the next turn. You'll have this 3/2 that won't have summoning sickness. This is all around a totally fine filler card. It's not a card that you're ever going to spend a real pick on. You can probably pick this up in the 6th through 8th range, I would say, and definitely on the lower end of that. You're not spending a high real pick on this, but you're pretty happy to play it. Up next is Distorted Curiosity. Distorted Curiosity is 2 and a blue for a sorcery at uncommon. Draw 2 cards. However, if your opponent is corrupted, this spell costs 2 less to cast. You pay a single blue mana to draw 2 cards. I think this is going to be extremely good in the corrupted deck if corrupted is a thing that you can get online reliably and somewhat quickly. If it's not, then this is just a divination, and divination is always a thermometer of the set, a barometer of the set. If this set is slow enough, straight up divination is typically playable. If the set is a bit too fast, divination is garbage. So we'll have to see how this goes. The fact that it's uncommon suggests to me that corrupted is something you can easily get on, and they just didn't want, 2, 3, 4 copies of Distorted Curiosity in decks on the regular. So I'm going to look for this to be a test of how the format is. I'm going to start out playing it a little bit highly, picking it kind of in the high end of 6th through 8th, we'll say, or the low end of 4th and 5th, and certainly try to get into corrupted. If I'm not going to be corrupting my opponents, this does drop quite a bit. Up next is Encroaching Mycosynth. Encroaching Mycosynth is 3 and a blue for an artifact at rare. Non-land permanents you control are artifacts in addition to their other types. The same is true for permanent spells you control and non-land permanent cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So every permanent that you have anywhere is an artifact. This is for the janky drafters, the janky builders, the people who don't care that drafts cost like $12 a pop to play. Which means it's not for me. It's an F for me. If you find yourself in a weird situation where you have a lot of things that care about artifacts and you also don't have enough artifacts, then you could play this. But I feel like you could also probably just draft more artifact creatures and artifacts instead of playing this. So I'm going to give this just a straight up F. Up next is Escaped Experiment. Escaped Experiment is 1 and a blue for an artifact creature Phyrexian Beast at common. It's a 2/1. Whenever Escaped Experiment attacks, target creature an opponent controls gets -X -0 until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control. So this is always going to be at least -1 -0 because this is an artifact. And if we have, a couple more artifacts, we might actually be able to straight up sort of bubble one of my opponent's creatures, but that's not that great, and this is just a piker otherwise. This is looking like extreme filler to me for a sort of perhaps tempo, aggro, artifact-based deck or something, but regardless, it's filler. You should be able to pick this up on the wheel. Up next is Experimental Augury. Experimental Augury is 1 and a blue for an instant at common. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 of them into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in any order, and proliferate. It is Anticipate with an extra keyword slapped onto it, so RIP Anticipate, I guess. This card is always fine. It is a good bit of card selection to look at your top 3 and grab one. Proliferating is going to be pretty dang good with all of the oil counters and poison counters kicking around. This will be playable in quite a lot of blue decks, especially the ones that care about blue-red sorceries and instants, of course. Non-creature cards is what I'm trying to say. You know, prowess. That said, this isn't a card that you spend a high pick on. You can certainly spend, you know, in the low 6th through 8th range, and in fact, you can often just wheel this card as playable as it is. It's just not powerful enough for a real pick. But definitely play it. Remember, pick order grades have nothing to do with how playable a card is. Up next is Eye of Melkitor. Eye of Melkitor is 2 and a blue for an artifact at common. When Eye of Melkitor enters the battlefield, scry 2. Whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Eye of Melkitor becomes a 4/4 Phyrexian Eye artifact creature until end of turn. So you need to be playing a lot of artifacts, or you need to be playing white with mites. Mites do primarily exist in white. There's like a couple of black cards that make them, but it's not really a big thing. I don't see a big reason to want to play this. The fact that it is stone cold nothing on any turn that I don't happen to have an artifact ETB is a real bad sign for me. The fact that this is common also suggests to me that you are not just casually turning this on. If you think about sort of the do-nothing artifacts that turn on when you cast a non-creature spell that we've seen in previous sets, those are always uncommon. Those are always uncommon for a reason, because they'd be way too good if you had a bunch of them. The fact that this is common says to me that this card is actually pretty mediocre. So this is actually just going to be a stone cold F for me. I don't see a reason to play this. I am totally out on it. Up next is Font of Progress. Font of Progress is a single blue mana for an artifact at uncommon. Font of Progress enters the battlefield with 2 oil counters on it. Pay 3 tap. Target player mills X cards, where X is the number of oil counters on Font of Progress. If this only ever has 2 oil counters on it, it is stone cold garbage. If it has 3, it's stone cold garbage. At 4, though, it does become stone cold garbage. You need to have way too many oil counters on this for this to be anything, which means you need to be playing this, proliferating like crazy, maybe even having some cards that specifically add oil counters. There's way too much work to go into this. I think this is just a stone cold F. I might give it a try if proliferate is incredibly common, but I think it's an F. Up next is Cataxian Anatomist. Cataxian Anatomist is 3 and a blue for a creature Phyrexian wizard at common. It's a 2/5. When it ETBs, you may tap it. If you do, proliferate. This seems pretty filler. A 4-mana 2/5 is not an aggressive creature. It's a very defensive creature. We're in Wishcoin Crab territory, and that really requires a slow format, a format where you want to be slow and can be slow. Because remember, there's a lot of formats where you might want to do something slow, and it just doesn't matter. But this sort of fights against itself a little bit, or maybe it actually gives a bit of flexibility. If you don't need that blocker, you can get that 1 turn of proliferate by having this enter the battlefield tapped, or technically it taps after it enters the battlefield. But yeah, I think this is filler. Maybe a tiny bit of glue for a very specific type of deck, but a card that you should be able to get well into the wheel. Up next is Kataxian Raptor. Kataxian Raptor is 2 and a blue for a creature Phyrexian bird at common. It's a 1/4 flyer. It ETBs with 3 oil counters on it. Remove an oil counter from it. It gets +1/-1 until end of turn. So a 3-mana 1/4 flyer is not something that I'm really looking for. Once I could make it into a 4/1 flyer, which could be a good bit of damage. I could also have a few turns of it being a 2/3 flyer or something like that. This looks like sort of creature filler for the oil counter matter, the proliferate, add oil counter deck. It's filler. It should be picked up on the wheel, and play better cards if you can. You probably don't have to feel bad playing one of these, but I'm not super looking to do it. Up next is Glistener Seer. Glistener Seer is a single blue mana for a creature Phyrexian Advisor at common. It's an 0/3. Glistener Seer enters the battlefield with 3 oil counters on it. Tap, remove an oil counter from it. Scry 1. This I kind of like. An 0/3 for 1 that I get to scry at least 3 times is not too shabby. I would like to scry more than that, so I do want to make sure that I'm playing some Proliferate, and Proliferate early enough that I'm not out of counters on this. You know, removing that last counter is going to be a little bit scary if you've not proliferated yet. If this format allows me to play cards like Glistener Seer and Experimental Augury and do all this stuff, I could actually really like this format if this deck is something that's good. So I'm going to start picking this, again, a little bit highly, by which I mean 6th through 8th pick. You're not spending a real pick on it, but I'm going to pick it up before the wheel and hope that this is a format where this is a good card, or you know, a good card relatively speaking. If it's not, if this format is just sort of fast aggro, kill them with poison, get them corrupted, you may just not have time to play stuff like this, and that would make me very sad. Up next is Icker Synthesizer. Icker Synthesizer is 1 and a blue for a creature Phyrexian Wizard at common. It's a 1/3. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it. As long as it has 4 or more oil counters on it, it gets +2/+0 and can't be blocked. Also, it doesn't fly, but it really looks like it is in the art. That's going to get me. That's going to get me. This is sort of filler for your blue-red Spells Matter deck. You are going to have a 1/3 on 2, which, you know, blocks a little bit, maybe gets in for a damage here or there, and then pretty quickly casting those non-creature spells, plus perhaps some Proliferate after you get that first counter on it. Suddenly you've got yourself a 2/3, or sorry, a 3/3 that can't be blocked, and that's quite a clock. So I'm going to look to play this in my decks where I'm playing a number of non-creature spells and some Proliferate. And I think this is going to sort of fill the realm of Haunting Figment from Dominaria United. You know, it's the blue can't be blocked thing that is not an amazing pick. It's not a high pick, but you put them in your deck and they do some work. So I think you can pick this up pretty close to the wheel, probably even after it, especially in later packs. But yeah, it seems playable. Up next is Icker Moon Gauntlet, 2 and a blue for an artifact at Mythic. Planeswalkers you control have 0 Proliferate and -12 take an extra turn after this one. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose a counter on target permanent, put an additional counter of that kind on that permanent. This seems like garbage. You need to already have 1 of 5 specific mythics or 1 of 5 specific rares, plus this mythic, plus you need to play that planeswalker and play this without the planeswalker having been killed for this to have any value for that first paragraph. That's just not a thing in Limited. The second paragraph really doesn't sound that good to me. I don't want to play a 3 mana do literally nothing artifact just so that I get a single, not even Proliferate, a tiny Proliferate, a 1-target Proliferate each time I cast a non-creature spell. This seems like way too much for 1 card. I am just never going to play this, short of me having preferably a couple of Planeswalkers. Yeah, this is realistically an F. Certainly there's going to be instances where you have 3 Planeswalkers going into pack 3 and you open this. Congrats. Somebody wins the lottery at some point. But realistically speaking, this is an F. Up next is Jace the Perfected Mind. Jace the Perfected Mind is 2 blue and a Phyrexian blue for legendary planeswalker Jace at Mythic. He starts with 5 loyalty, however he is completed. That does mean that if you pay 2 life for that blue mana pip, he is going to enter with 3 loyalty counters instead. +1 until your next turn, up to 1 target creature gets -3/-0. -2, target player mills 3 cards. Then if a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it, you draw 3. Otherwise, you draw 1. -X, target player mills 3 times X cards. Jace, to me, seems to be pretty okay. If your opponent's not pressuring you, that +1 can just build up and really stop them from pressuring you even further. That can allow you to get Jace big enough to do a big -X, because it only takes a few turns. If you play him for 2 blue, he's immediately going up to 6 on that very first turn. Your next turn, he's at 7. One more turn, he's milling for almost half of your opponent's starting deck and keeping 1 loyalty left. That puts your opponent just, I think, 2-ish turns away from dying to being milled out. I think Jace is going to be pretty dang good so long as you are able to defend him. Obviously, playing him onto an empty board and your opponent has more than 1 creature is going to be a problem. So be a little bit careful, but I think he is an easy snap first pick. He's not quite the Wanderer level. This is a good example of why I think the Wanderer has no business being rare. I think Jace could possibly actually be a rare instead of a mythic, but still great and an easy first pick. Up next is Malcotors Watcher. Malcotors Watcher is 1 and a blue for an artifact creature Phyrexian drone at common. It's a 1/1 flying vigilance, and when it dies, draw a card. Not a big fan of this. I don't like 1/1 flyers for 1. I certainly don't like 1/1 flyers for 2. When it dies, it draws a card. Okay, I guess, but I could also play something like that Anticipate and honestly get way more value. This looks like extreme filler. It's on the far side of the wheel, and I'm going to attempt to not play it. Up next is Meldweb Curator. Meldweb Curator is 3 and a blue for a creature Phyrexian wizard at common. It's a 3/4. When it ETBs, put up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. This obviously depends entirely on how good your instants and sorceries are. If you've got a good chunk of removal or a good chunk of valuable ones, this goes up in value a little bit. Of course, you don't have to put something on top. This could just be a 3/4 for 4, which is, not good. But you could play it. Realistically, you can pick this up on the wheel in most packs if you do want to be playing them. It's just going to be deck by deck if you actually want to play them or not. Up next is Meldwebstrider. Meldwebstrider is 4 and a blue for an artifact vehicle at common. It's a 5/5 with vigilance. It ETPs with 1 oil counter. You can take that oil counter off to make it an artifact creature until end of turn. Otherwise, it's got Crew 3. Crew 3 is typically the breaking point for me. A card needs to be incredible for me to want a Crew 3, and this card is not. It costs a lot of mana. Once it can be a 5/5 vigilance without me needing to crew, but that's about it unless I'm proliferating on it. This just looks like an F to me. I just don't think I want to play this. There's way better things that I want to do in my proliferate decks and my counter decks and my decks that have creatures that could crew this. I'd rather be attacking with them than, putting all my eggs into this basket. This just looks like trash to me. It's an F. Up next is Mercurial Spelldancer. Mercurial Spelldancer is 1 and a blue for a creature Phyrexian rogue at rare. It's a 2/1. It can't be blocked. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may remove 2 oil counters from it. If you do, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. This card seems fantastic. 2/1s for 2 that are just straight up unblockable is going to be a whole lot of damage. You'll obviously want to be playing this in a instant and sorcery deck, which means you're going to be getting oil counters on this, and you're going to be having hopefully some decent targets to copy and double up that effect. So this seems like a first pick to me. You obviously want to build around it just a little bit, but an easy first pick for Mercurial Spelldancer. I like it quite a lot. Up next is Mesmerizing Dose. Mesmerizing Dose is 1 blue for an enchantment aura at common. Enchant creature. When it ETBs, tap that creature, then proliferate. That creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So here we have Claustrophobia or Encrust, but with proliferate added. Get wrecked, those old cards. Power creep is very real. This card is your blue removal, and it is good blue removal. Use it on something that is causing you a whole lot of problems, whether that be a flyer or a bomb or whatever. This card is very good, and it has proliferate. You're going to pick this in the sort of second, third, maybe fourth range. Up next is Mind Splice Apparatus. Mind Splice Apparatus is 3 and a blue for an artifact at rare. It has flash. At the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on Mind Splice Apparatus. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each oil counter on Mind Splice Apparatus. So I don't tend to like do-nothing artifacts, and this is kind of the definition of a do-nothing artifact. It's 4 mana for an artifact that gets some counters on it. But it doesn't do anything unless you're casting instant and sorcery spells, in which case it does something kind of good. I suspect at 4 mana, this might just be too expensive. I do like that assuming you play this on your opponent's turn, it is immediately a Goblin Electromancer. You're getting that 1 discount right away. And then the next turn you're getting that 2 discount. But that's going to pretty rapidly run out of being that much extra value, right? Like most instant and sorceries have 1 colorless, 2 colorless, maybe 3 colorless mana. If this was 3 mana, I think it might actually be a lot more playable. At 4, I'm just really kind of iffy on this. I think there's just going to be more cards that I'm going to want to put in to my instant and sorcery non-creature spell deck. So at the moment, I'm going to pass on this and pick it up, quite late when I'm already into that deck to give it a try, which means I probably won't see it for a while since it's a rare. But I do expect this is just going to turn out to not be that playable. Up next is Minor Misstep. Minor Misstep is a single blue mana for an instant at uncommon. Counter target spell with mana value 1 or less. This is an F. There just are not that many 1 mana spells that you actually want to counter in limited. This is constructed only. This is an F in limited. Don't ever play it. Up next is Prologue to Pharysis. Prologue to Pharysis is 1 and a blue for an instant at common. Each opponent gets a poison counter and also draw a card. This could be annoying. This could be really annoying. This is a great way to get that 3rd counter for Corrupt. This is a great way to get that 1st counter to proliferate your way to Corrupt. Plus, it draws a card, so it just cantrips as well. I think this is decently playable in kind of that cantrip spot, right? The, Curate, for example. You're never picking a Curate highly, but you're pretty happy to have them and you're pretty happy to play them. So realistically, this is way down in kind of the late 6th through 8th pick. Probably even can get them on the wheel, especially in pack 2 and pack 3. But I think you're pretty happy to play, some number of these. I think Corrupted is going to be very easy to get, unfortunately. Up next is Quicksilver Fisher. Quicksilver Fisher is 3 blue for a creature Phyrexian Drake at common. It's a 4/3 flyer. When Quicksilver Fisher enters the battlefield, draw a card, then discard a card. 5 mana for a 4/3 flyer is pretty okay. Maybe ever so slightly overcosted. 3 toughness is a little bit low, but hey, it's a flyer. It'll get in. Plus, you get a loot on it. This all told just seems fine. This seems like, slightly higher class filler. Unfortunately, as a 5-drop, you're not going to be playing a bunch of these. You're probably going to be playing 1. But yeah, it seems fine. I think I'm happy to grab one of these in the 6th through 8th pick, and I'm definitely never sad to play, or rarely sad, I guess, to play the first one. Up next is Reject Imperfection. Reject Imperfection is 1 blue for an instant at uncommon. Counter target spell. If that spell's mana value was 3 or less, proliferate. This doesn't seem great. I don't want to be countering really low mana value spells typically. Typically, I don't want to be playing Cancel, period. 1 blue is just a lot of mana to keep up to hope that you get to counter something. And I want to be countering big things. And if I counter a big thing, I get punished and don't get to proliferate. This just feels pretty mediocre in kind of the exact same range that Cancel would be, which is pick it up on the extraordinarily late wheel and do not main deck it. Sideboard it in if you find yourself absolutely requiring it, or if you have somehow built the platonic ideal of a control deck, perhaps you could main deck it, but realistically, throw it in the side and probably don't bring it in. Up next is Serum Snare. Serum Snare is 1 and a blue for an instant at uncommon. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If that permanent had mana value 3 or less, proliferate. This makes a lot more sense because you're typically very happy to bounce a token because you kill it. And then you also get that proliferate tacked onto it. I love bounce. I still want to love bounce. Bounce has been in somewhat of a bad place lately, although it was kind of okay in Brothers War, and it, I think, was kind of okay in Dominaria United. So I'll keep an eye on Serum Snare being decent. I'll certainly start out picking it kind of high in the 4th, 5th pick range, and we'll see how it goes. Hopefully Bounce will have its day once more, but unfortunately, vanilla creatures are dead, and everything has an ETB effect, which means Bounce is nowhere near as good as it once was. Up next is Tamios Immobiliser. Tamios Immobiliser is 3 and a blue for an artifact at uncommon. Tamios Immobiliser enters the battlefield with 4 oil counters on it. Tap, remove an oil counter from Tamios Immobiliser. Tap target artifact or creature. Just as written, this is fine, but not amazing, since you're only going to get to use it 4 times. The great thing with Icy Manipulator is you get to use it over and over and over and drag the game out until your win condition happens. But there's so much proliferate in blue, and a few ways of specifically putting oil counters on things, that you might actually get 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, who knows how many activations of this. Meaning that this should, in a lot of games and most decks, do a pretty dang good impersonation of Icy Manipulator, which means that this should be a pretty high pick. I'm going to start picking this around 2nd or 3rd. I definitely want to pair it with Proliferate, though. I want to be using this more than 4 times. But if I am, I think this card is probably just going to be fan-freaking-tastic. Up next is Tamios Logbook. Tamios Logbook is 2 and a blue for an artifact at uncommon. Pay 5 and a blue and tap it to draw a card. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each other artifact you control. We had something very similar to this in Dominar United, where it cared about domain. I didn't super like it there. I think it should be easier to get just incidental artifacts than it was to get domain, but I'm not sure about actually putting this card in my deck. Costs a lot to put this card in my deck. If I'm playing a large number of artifacts, if I know that I'm going to have that mana cost down to preferably 2, maybe 3 on the regular, then this could get a bit more playable. So I think it depends on a very specific deck. I don't think I want to pick it highly to get into that deck, especially because it means that I'm going to have to play just random artifacts to get this online as opposed to, good cards. So I'm starting this out slightly lower, I guess, because I don't want to pick this and push myself into the artifact deck. I would rather have this as a reward. So I think this is going to drop down to kind of the 5th, 6th through 8th pick at the beginning. If I found myself into the artifact deck, obviously it's going to go up more in 2nd and 3rd pack. So be careful. This is very deck dependent. It certainly doesn't go into every deck. Up next is Techythal Inquiry Dominus. 2 blue for a legendary creature Phyrexian Horror at Mythic. It's a 3/5 flyer. If you would proliferate twice. Pay 1 Phyrexian blue, remove 3 counters from among our other artifact creatures and planeswalkers you control to put an indestructible counter on it. This one, like the white one, just seems great. 4 mana 3/5 flyer. I'm already playing that somewhat happily. And then all my proliferate, which is seemingly plentiful in blue, is double proliferate. And hey, if I'm double proliferating, there's counters everywhere. If I have the opportunity, I can make this guy indestructible too. Seems like an easy snap first pick. Up next is Thummingbird. Thummingbird is 1 and a blue for a creature Phyrexian Bird Horror at uncommon. It's a 1/1 flyer. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, proliferate. This is a reprint from New Phyrexia, where it was an all-star in Limited. Absolutely huge all-star in Limited. And it probably will be here as well. This will significantly help ensure that you get corrupted online, possibly just kill your opponent with poison. It will put those oil counters on all of your things that have oil counters. Card is going to be a very huge role player in every blue deck, I have a feeling. This is a card that you should probably spend a 2nd or 3rd pick on. You might not even feel bad first picking it, depending on what your rare is. Really high pick, really important card for blue. Pick it high. Up next is Transplant Theorist. Transplant Theorist is 3 and a blue for an artifact creature Phyrexian Artificer at uncommon. It's a 2/4. Whenever Transplant Theorist or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Pay 2, put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. So 4 mana 2/4 is okay, but not something I'm super looking for in a lot of decks. If I'm playing a lot of artifacts, then being able to loot some number of times would be pretty decent. It does also loot when it comes in as well. This is definitely a card that's looking to play a very, 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 very long game. So much so that you might actually start doing that thing where you have an empty library and you just start picking what card you draw each turn with its 2nd ability. I don't tend to go for those decks. I find that, especially in Modern Limited, it just doesn't support games going that long. So I'm going to not pick this very highly, kind of in the 6th through 8th range. I'm fine with it being a 2/4 for 4 that might loot a few times. It'll go up if I have more artifacts, but I'm not currently looking to do that based on how aggressive the format looks to me so far. Up next is Traitor Drake. Traitor Drake is 2 and a blue for a creature Phyrexian Drake at uncommon. It's a 0/0 flyer. It ETBs with an oil counter on it, and it gets +1/+1 for each oil counter on it. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it, which is functionally a +1/+1 counter here. Yeah, this should be another huge role player in that blue-red spells matter in the proliferate deck, especially because a lot of your instants and sorceries proliferate, which would give this 2 counters. This should get out of control pretty quickly, and you're going to want to spend a pretty high pick on this. Because I have a huge predilection for the blue-red, will probably pick this in the 2nd, 3rd pick range. It's probably in the 4th, 5th pick range, but it is very, very good. Up next is Unctus Grand Metatect. Unctus is 1 blue for a legendary artifact creature Phyrexian Vidalcan. Rare. They are running out of space on that type line. It's a 2/4. Other blue creatures you control have, whenever this creature becomes tapped, to draw a card, then discard a card. Other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. Pay a Phyrexian mana until end of turn. Target creature you control becomes a blue artifact, in addition to its other colors and types. Activate only as a sorcery. So this just kind of seems like the blue lord of the set. All of your blue creatures, whenever they probably attack, unless they happen to have a tap ability, are going to loot, which is nice. A lot of your blue creatures are going to be artifacts, which means they're going to be +1/+1, and you could potentially pay that mana to give a non-artifact creature +1/+1. That's probably the main thing that ability is going to be doing. There's probably going to be some interesting interactions that you could do with that, but that's going to be the main thing. This seems like a first pick, and then you just really heavily go into blue artifacts, and it'll be a very, very good pick there. So yeah, I think you first pick this. I don't think it's quite bomb level. This is definitely not winning on its own. It must have artifact creatures along with it. It really wants blue creatures along with it. It's mostly giving you value. It's not busting the game wide open, but it's still a good first pick. Up next is Unctus's Retrofitter. Unctus's Retrofitter is 2 and a blue for a creature Phyrexian Artificer at uncommon. It's a 2/3 with Toxic 1. When it ETBs, up to 1 target artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness 4/4 for as long as Unctus's Retrofitter remains on the battlefield. This seems pretty decent for your blue artifact-heavy deck. It's going to upgrade your 1/1, your 2/2, your 3/3 into a 4/4. It's going to turn your non-creature artifact into a 4/4. Unfortunately, I don't think there's anything kind of like treasure tokens kicking around or power stones. You're not turning a nigh on useless or a not terribly useful thing into a 4/4. You're probably turning a semi-real thing into a 2/4 or into a 4/4, but that's still a decent upgrade for some of your early artifact creature plays. It has Toxic 1, which means if you can get it in, you can get some poison going, but I think this is overall pretty decent in kind of the 4th, 5th pick range. Probably once you know you're heading in this direction, I don't think you take this to get into the artifact deck. Up next is Vivisurgeon's Insight. It's 3 blue for a sorcery at common. Draw 3 cards, proliferate. It looks like there's a lot of text on this card, but it's all italicized. Yeah, this will be kind of like the Divination, a bit of a flag of how this format is. If you can play a 5-mana sorcery, draw 3, proliferate, it's probably a very slow set. If it is not a very slow set, you probably can't play this card. So we're going to have to see how this format shakes out. This card could be somewhere in the range of 6th through 8th pick, or it could be in the range of nigh on F. So let's see how the format goes. I hope I can play this card. Our final card for today is Watchful Blisterzoa. Watchful Blisterzoa is 4 blue for a creature Phyrexian Jellyfish at uncommon. It's a 4/4 flyer. It ETBs with an oil counter on it. When it dies, draw cards equal to the number of oil counters on it. 4/4 flyer for 6 is expensive. We would love if that was 1 more and we were a little bit more in Sarah Angel territory, but so be it. However, it's going to draw a card, at least, when it dies, and assuming you're playing a bit of proliferate, it's going to draw you quite a bit of cards, and it's going to really present a problem for your opponent. They are probably going to need to deal with a 4/4 flyer. If they don't, they're going to die from getting hit by 4 in the air every turn. And if they do deal with it, it's drawing you at least 1 card, and if it's been around for a couple of turns, it's perhaps, refilling some portion of your hand. The card seems fantastic. I think it's a relatively high pick in the 4th through 5th pick range. It is a little bit expensive. I do tend to prefer my high picks to be, unconditional removal, absolute crazy bombs, or very efficient things. This is not a very efficient thing, but it is a pretty dang good thing. So 4th through 5th pick for me, I like it quite a bit. That's going to wrap it up for blue. Blue looks really interesting to me because I really like playing blue-red spells decks, and it looks like we might actually have one supported in this format. Proliferate's going to do a whole lot of work. I really hope that I can play, kind of blue-red, draw cards, do some things, proliferate some things, find a win condition win without just getting run over. So we'll see how it goes. Let me know what you think of blue. Let me know what you think of one so far in the comments down below. Please click that thumbs up button, and if you're not subscribed, click subscribe. That's super important. Fun fact, literally every time I post a video, I lose subscribers simply due to the fact that I'm posting a video. So it'd be great if we could get those subscriber numbers going up instead of crashing down. You can always find me over at Twitch on Wednesdays and other days. Next Thursday, I will be playing the Phyrexia All Will Be One early access event. So if you want to see an early access before the pre-release even, come check out twitch.tv/themanaleak. As well, check out patreon.com/themanaleak if you want to help the channel keep going. There are some great people over there who keep the channel going. But that's all for me for today. I'll see you tomorrow for the black set review. Let me know what you want to let me know, and I'll see you all next time.